Hi, everyone. This is going to be a continuation of our review of Paul's Christology about Jesus. And we did a part 3, which discussed the topic that is going to continue here. And that is that Paul's Christology also, among other things that are problematic, it matches John's warning of the Antichrist's message. So the verses we're going to look at today here are primarily 1 John 4:3 and 2 John 1:7 versus Galatians 1 verse 12. We're also going to look at Romans 5:12 to 14 and 18 to 19. That's the original sin doctrine, because that has an implication, as you'll see, on the validity of Jesus being human and being our Savior. Now, I just want to finish here. The main point, or one of the key points in this episode, would be as stated. Paul expressly says Jesus is not at all human or a man in Galatians 1, verse 12. It can go right by you and you don't see it, but I'm going to show you to you here today. All right. Now, let's look again at the message of Antichrist that John warns us about. 1 John 4, verse 3. And every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh, that's human flesh, sarx, S-A-R-X, human flesh, is not of God, and this is that spirit of Antichrist, or this is the Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is it in the world. Similarly, in 2 John 7, we read in verse 7, for many deceivers are entered into the world who confess not that Jesus has come in the flesh, S-A-R-X, sarx means human flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. Now, why would flesh of humans be important? We'll get into that, but let's listen to what Paul says about Jesus' origin. In Galatians 1 verse 11 through 12. So you have to know, Paul is trying to say, he's got none of his gospel from the 12 apostles, and he's gotten it all from revelations from Jesus. But now watch how he makes it definitive. What is the difference in the apostles and the difference between his Jesus and in his realm of visitation, so to speak. Verse 11, I want you to know, brothers, that the gospel preached by me is not of human origin. Anthropos, that's the word for human or man. For I did not receive it from man, anthropos. Again, that's human or man. I have not received it from any human. He's not trying to say he got it from a woman. He means I didn't get it from any human being. Nor was I taught it. Instead, I received it by a revelation from Jesus Christ. So he was not taught this. It was not a didasco event where the apostles are teaching him anything. He doesn't want to know anything from them. He actually says in Galatians, the apostles, imparted nothing to me. I've gotten all my messages from above. Most of us don't read any of that, and we don't know where Paul's getting his stuff. But he's telling us it's not from any man, and therefore, when he says, I'm getting it from whom? Jesus Christ, or revelation from Jesus Christ, he's telling you right there, Jesus isn't human. Jesus is not an anthropos. He is not of our race. And that's definitive here because he says it multiple times, not once, but twice, that he didn't get it from a human. He didn't get it from an anthropos. And therefore, he didn't get it from the Jesus of earth who had resurrected and directly went into heaven in a resurrected state in that same body. So what is he talking about? He does not believe that Jesus had a human body. It just looked like it. And now, why does this have any importance? Why would the Antichrist want to come with a message more than once we saw to tell us that Jesus is not a human being? He's not a man. He's not one of us. Well, that would destroy two things. Why must Jesus be a man, aka a human being? Otherwise, Jesus is neither one, the Messiah Christ, nor can Jesus be the prophet of Deuteronomy 18, verses 16 to 19. So these are the two titles that Jesus actually has, but most Christians don't know anything about the prophet, his status as a prophet. We'll get into that. Peter says so in Acts 3, and I'll show you why. But here's the message about Jesus having a Davidic birth. And of course, I'm going to read this passage to you, and you're going to say, I've never heard this, because this would shock you. So just hold your horses, and now I'll explain to you the middle of this. But this is where the prophecy of David having an heir to sit on the throne, and all kings are what are called anointed. They're all messiahs. In other words, they're all anointed to become a king. So calling Jesus an anointed one, technically, it's a generic term for kings. But in this case, it meant a special prophet, a special king, the Messiah. So let's read 2 Samuel 7, verses 12 to 16. This is the prophet Samuel speaking to David. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body. Period. I'm going to stop right there. So does this a human being? Has to be. He's coming from the body. The flesh of David is going to be the seed that sows a seed for his uh, Davidic lineage through Jesus, to Jesus. If he doesn't come that way, he's not. It's not the story you're hearing isn't from God. Okay, it has to have that element. And I'm going to just pause right here. You're going to go, oh, what about the virgin birth? Does that invalidate Jesus? Unfortunately, it does, but it's added in the 180s. And we have ultimately numerous, I would venture to say over 10 episodes that prove that there's no document after, excuse me, all the documents prior to 180 that we can trace to 180 or earlier all have it Joseph begat Jesus or worse to those effect. The earliest, oldest New Testament was Agnes Lewis's the Syriac palimpsest, and we have that free online. I have a book list of all the public domain books I make available that you can download through my Airtable, and you can find it there, and you can read it yourself. That dates from the middle 100s. And what do you think it says? Joseph begat Jesus. So all and a top scholar who was the editor of the English version of the King James Bible from Oxford University. If I recollect, he was Mr. Cornbear, and he found 12 early references that Joseph begat Jesus in the earliest documents of the church. This was a fraud that was committed upon the church in about 180 AD, and it appears to be the Ebion, the original apostolic church's heirs in that 180 period, concluded that this was a fraud committed by enemies of Christ to destroy his Davidic lineage. But later, uh, the Ebionites were anti-Trinitarians in the 300s, and so they had to be excoriated in reverse. And so this whole thing never gets fixed. And just to leave it where it should be is Delitzsch, a famous theological translator, in 1905 wrote an article. We have this all summarized where it says clearly this is an error and a corruption that happened early in the church, and we need to go in and reverse it because otherwise Jesus isn't the Messiah. So sorry to tell everybody, you have to face the reality. There is a corruption because this prophecy can't come true. But now I want to show you with Paul. If you believe Paul, it's not true because if you believe Paul, Paul says he's not human. He's not. How can he have a seed from David if he isn't a human being? He just appears to be human. So let's keep going. But watch what was really going to be disturbing as I continue. And I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So this is a anointed one, a Messiah who will be king forever, and that is Jesus. Okay, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. So now it continues. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. Okay, so this is the prophecy of Messiah. But it does say there, when he commits iniquity. So now you have to resolve the question, does Jesus have sin, or is he being spoken of as a child when he commits iniquity? I will have to correct him. And it sounds like he's saying, I'll discipline him just like would I use a rod to discipline a child. So what about that possibility? Are we to just say, oh, well, we don't need to have any Davidic lineage, although that's implicit in both the Matthew and Luke versions of the narration of the birth of Christ? Well, the answer to this is that we have a lot of mistaken ideas from Paul, again, where he talks about original sin, and therefore even children are not innocent. And unfortunately, according to Paul, all children are going to hell who haven't yet confessed Christ, which, if you didn't know it, that's where the whole idea of infant baptism comes from Paul's words. You have to baptize children who have no idea that they're being baptized into Christ, and that somehow that's going to save them. And that's what that's what the Catholic Church told parents, and that's what the Protestant Church said. You know what? Since we have this original sin doctrine from Paul, we're not going to fix that one either. But let me show you. I'm going to digress now a little bit so I can address the innocence of children before maturity for you. All right, so let's look at Paul's original sin doctrine in Romans. And this begins in his letter to the Romans. Paul says that it is by one man that sin entered the world. That's Romans 5:12, and that by one man's disobedience all were made sinners. Romans 5:19. So that isn't been interpreted as your children are all sinners. and they're going to hell. And until they confess Christ, they are all still going to go to hell. Again, as I mentioned, baptism was offered as a solution to this worrisome feeling. Instead of telling people that Paul is wrong, this doctrine is false. You're reading, and I'm going to read Paul's doctrine, but it's completely false and anti-biblical, as I'll show you in a minute. Romans 5:12-14, verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man's sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. That's a problematical verse, but we'll ignore that. Verse 14, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. So the fact that your child could die is proof that he is under this basically, he's a sinner under the similitude to Adam's transgression. Verse 18, therefore, as by the offense of one judgment came upon all men, that's all anthropos, all people is really what it's saying, to condemnation. So everyone's going to hell. We're all starting off as sinners, and we're all going to hell. That's Paul's view. That's not God Yahweh's view, but that's Paul's view. I'm going to show you that to you in a minute. Even so, by righteousness of one, the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life. So now he's trying to say, hey, here's my solution. Just have faith and you're going to be saved. Well, gosh, what about my children? And he didn't ever give a solution to that. So that's where you get the modern, the Roman Catholic fix of that is to say, oh, well, you just have to have a baptism. Verse 19, for as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall be many made righteous. This is Romans 5:12-14 and 18-19. Complete and utter apostasy from God's word. So we'll go take a look at that. Now, I just want to say this. Paul's logic of imputed sin for humans means Jesus, if he was human, could not atone, right? So he'd be a sinner. He'd be condemned. I mean, listen to what Paul says. I mean, you are a defense of one judgment came upon all men to condemnation. So if Jesus were a human being, Jesus would be condemned, and he could not be an atoner at all. At least that's the way I understand it. And he has to be without sin. He has to be a perfect, without blemish. Let's put it that way. Ergo, Paul's original sin doctrine fits Paul's saying Jesus is only appears to be human. Okay, so we've gone through that, and that was in Philippians 2, verse 7. All right, but now we're going to see that we have to hold on to this, that Jesus isn't a sinner at any point in time, and that is a problem because that's exactly what Paul says, 2 Corinthians 5:21, and he knew no sin. He made him who knew no sin to be a sin offering for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So if Christ has no sin, that means he couldn't be human because he just defined humanity to be everybody is subject to the condemnation because of that one sin by Adam. So Jesus obviously cannot be human, and that's why Paul keeps insisting that Jesus just looks like a human being. He's not a human being. So I just want to show you Paul is so biblically false. It's almost ridiculous that nobody caught this. So here's a good article by a church. Don't know the denomination, July 23, 2023. It doesn't matter because the Bible is all you need to get the verse. He wrote an article, The Biblical Age of Accountability, Isaiah 7:15-16, and Deuteronomy 1, verse 39. Let's take a look. He says this, children are innocent until they reach the biblical age of accountability. Isaiah 7, verses 15-16 twice states that until a certain age, a baby will not know, quote, how to refuse the evil and choose the good. Similarly, Deuteronomy 1, verse 39 says, quote, little ones have no knowledge of good or evil. Now, another thing we need to know is, you should remember this, is the Exodus generation was told, you're not going to make it into the promised land, but we're going to let your children in. Why would that be so? Because whatever these people were doing, worshiping the golden calf or other sins, that didn't have anything to do with the children being, even if they participated, they were not of age yet, so they could not be deemed sinners. Even if they sinned, even if they technically violated God's law, they do not have the moral responsibility yet until they become of age to have that going on. And by the way, in the Isaiah passage, if you read that carefully, it's very clear that a prophecy is determined by that date, and the date that this boy becomes. This is Isaiah's son. When that boy becomes of age and mature, God is saying, then this other event will be triggered by that date, and it came fulfilled exactly prophetically in the time of Isaiah. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the there's another textual issue between Numbers and Deuteronomy, whether in Numbers it may appear that the older generation didn't make it in, but it's very clear when you read Deuteronomy they did. God showed leniency to the older generation eventually, and glad to see that. But that's a whole different sub issue here, and she goes into this. Dr. Jilly Googler, I just want you to know about her because she's the one who pointed out this text and summarize it the way I just told you. So she's a senior lecturer of biblical studies at the University of Haifa, PhD, Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She's written a good book, When God Wanted to Destroy the Chosen People, Biblical Traditions and Theology on the Move. So she's saying, yeah, he wanted to do it, but he decided against it in the end. And if you read all the way to the end of Deuteronomy, whatever was being said in Numbers is adjusted, in other words, by Deuteronomy, telling you how it really ended. They didn't all get killed. God showed mercy on many of them. All right, so getting back to the 2 Samuel 7 verses 12 to 16 passage. So when I say this is the passage that prophesies of Jesus coming from a Davidic lineage, it has to be so. This is the prophecy. And just because it says when he commits iniquity, and that could have a bearing in some people's mind that this could be false, because why we know Jesus is not a sinner, I've just given you the solution. Is Jesus had been a child at the same time, and at that point he could have committed iniquity, but it would be unaccountable iniquity. In other words, the child has no accountability to God. He's not reached the age of what they call accountability, and this is still a tradition amongst Jewish people. That's why at age 13 they bar mitzvah their children. That's when they believe they've reached the age of accountability, and that's why they get the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah too. All right, so that answers question number one. Why would the Antichrist want to say Jesus is not a human being, that he had to be not a human to be sinless, according to Paul, because Paul has this doctrine of original sin. So Jesus can't be human for the reason I just showed you. If there was original sin and it created judgment on all mankind, then Jesus can't be a human being under Paul's view of original sin. So it's very clear Paul does not believe Jesus is a human being. It only appears that way, and we saw that just in this digression. Next, now I want to show you the other reason why the Antichrist wants to say Jesus is not a human being, is not a man, because it would deprive Jesus of being the prophet of Deuteronomy 18, verses 16 to 19. And I've explained then Peter in the book of Acts, chapter 3, verses 21 to 23. Peter says Jesus is the prophet of Deuteronomy 18, and he quotes the passage almost in full. And we'll go through it a little bit in the upcoming. And therefore, this is a second title or position that Jesus has. It's very important, but is ignored in the preaching that you receive. Again, there's many reasons why they don't do that, because it would conflict with following Paul. If you want to follow Paul, you're not allowed to do that. You have to follow the prophet of Deuteronomy, and that's the words you must hold everyone accountable to, not somebody who's claiming they've heard from. Paul doesn't even quote ever once, not one word of Jesus that he heard in the book. His revelations. The only exception is 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7, when Jesus, supposedly Jesus says, Paul says, please free me from the torment of an angel of Satan. Paul praises this 3 times, he says, in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7. And Jesus refuses and says, no, you know what? And your weakness is my strength. So Jesus refuses to cast out a demon out of Paul, his request 3 times, desperate. Jesus says, no, it's better for you. I leave him there, because this will keep you humble. And Paul says, you know what? I'm going to glory in my suffering because Christ wants me to glory. So he made the best of it he could, but I think he doesn't understand. He's not really dealing with the true Jesus. And that explains why his Jesus doesn't cast a demon out of him, and he leaves him in him, and it torments him. And you got to look at the Greek, by the way. Go to Mounsey's reverse interlinear. You'll see the word angel of Satan is tormenting him. You'll see the word torment. All of these things are downplayed and basically mollified, so you don't even know the true depths of which Paul was willing to accept his Jesus would refuse to release him from a torment of an angel of Satan. Just please look at it. But anyway, I digress. Let's look at the passage of Deuteronomy 18, 16, 19. And you'll see the way this is described is the prophet has to be a man, not a supernatural being or an angel. Let's listen. Deuteronomy 18. I'm using the World English Bible because it shows you where the word Yahweh appears. And I think that's important, my friends. Verse 15, Yahweh your God will raise up to you a prophet from among you of your brothers like me. This is Moses telling the people. God told me something, and he's actually going to repeat it in verse 17 verbatim from God. But here he's telling the people an introduction. He's saying, God told me that a prophet will be raised up like me, okay? Meaning like me, a human being like me. You shall listen to him. This is according to all that you desired of Yahweh your God in Horeb in the day of the assemblies. This is when they're getting the Ten Commandments, saying, quote, let me not hear again Yahweh my God's voice, neither let me see this great fire anymore, that I not die. So the people were upset at the sound, this terrifying sound of Yahweh speaking. So they basically asked Moses, can you please go up the mountain away from us and take the commandments from God somewhere else? Because this is just driving us, uh, it's very upsetting. Okay. They're afraid. Verse 17. Now, this is the actual quote of Yahweh that now Moses follows up with. Yahweh said to me, Moses, that they have well said that which they have spoken. Another pause. So God is approving their statement is a fair request. He understands they were very upset by hearing his voice. So this is his solution. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brothers like you, Moses. I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I shall command him. It shall happen that whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. That last part implies a very strong negative meaning. I will require it in terms of punishment. So if you do not listen and obey the prophet, that's Jesus, and you'll see that's what Peter says. If you don't listen to him, you will, well, let's let Peter tell you. I'll let Peter tell you. So this is repeated in Acts 3. So let's look at Acts 3. This is Peter, and he's going to lead 5,000 Jewish people who are involved in the crucifixion of Jesus to repentance, and he uses not so much at all the message that Jesus is the Messiah. He uses the message that he's the prophet, and that's a universal prophet. This is not a prophet just for Jews, but for Gentiles, so that all people would be held accountable to have listened to Jesus. Let's listen to verse 20 of chapter 3 of Acts. And that he may send Christ Jesus, who was ordained for you before, whom heaven must receive until the times of the restoration of all things. I'm going to say pause for a second there. So remember Matthew 24, verses 5 and 17 to 21. So Jesus says, I'm not coming back until every eye sees me. So he has been given an appointment. Peter's even referencing it right here, that he has to stay in heaven and not come down until what we call the second coming. The next coming of Christ, once he ascended in chapter 1 of the book of Acts, he will not come back to earth in any private or wilderness road, he says in Matthew 24, but he has to stay there up in heaven until the appointed time. So that's what he's saying. Whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God spoke long ago by the mouth of his holy prophets. For Moses indeed said to the fathers, quote, the Lord will raise up a prophet for you from among your brothers like me, meaning like Moses. This is the portion that Moses is himself summarizing what he tells the people. You shall listen to him in all things, whatever he says to you. So that means listening means obey. It doesn't mean just having your ears open. It means obeying. It will be that every soul that will not listen to that prophet, meaning anybody who doesn't obey Jesus, what's the consequence? I obeyed Paul. I obeyed Paul. Don't I get an excuse? The answer is no, you don't get an excuse. If you will not listen to that prophet, Jesus, you will be utterly destroyed from among your people. And it cites even here Deuteronomy 18 verses 15 and then 18 to 19. So it's a very serious thing that if you don't obey Jesus. And if you're curious, how does Peter know this? Is he was one of the three apostles at the transfiguration of Jesus. And what do you think is the words that are spoken over Yeshua's head by Yahweh? So this is not at the baptism. This is sometime later. Yahweh speaks over Jesus' head and says to the apostles, listen to him, meaning to Jesus. And that is a direct quote I showed you here. Listen to him is right here. You shall speak everything I command. It shall be that whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require of him. So listening to Jesus is the exact point of this message. And it's over here again. So listen to him. Every soul who you shall listen to him. See there? So that's why they recognized God Yahweh is speaking over Jesus' head a command that applied to the prophet, the special prophet, the prophet of Deuteronomy 18. Let me pull it all together for you. Okay. So I have 3 verses shown on the screen at the same time right here. And then I'm going to wrap it up at that after I showed you this. Galatians 1, verse 11 to 12 is on the top left. 2 Corinthians 12:7 is in the middle top. 2 Corinthians 12, verses 3 to 6 from the bottom right. So what did we learn over here in Galatians 1? that Paul didn't get his gospel from the apostles. He didn't get it from anyone of human origin. He didn't get it from a man. He got it from revelation from Jesus Christ. Do you see this black arrow in Apocalypse? Well, look over here. Apocalypse in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7. This is Mount C interlinear, where you can see these things. So Paul is saying, he's talking about extraordinary character of my revelations, right? And over here, he's saying, I'm having a revelation from Jesus Christ. Well, where did these things happen? Jesus had already ascended 8 chapters earlier than the experience where Paul meets someone claiming, I am Jesus on the road to Damascus. So that's in Acts 9. That's the first time it appears. In Acts 1 is when Jesus ascended. So it's 8 chapters later. So this is totally talking to a being in another realm. And then he says, because of his extraordinary apocalypsis, remember, he's had these revelations from Jesus Christ. He says, that in order that I should not become conceited, there was given to me a thorn, a scolops, in the flesh, sarx, human flesh, by an angelos of Satan to torment me, that I should not become conceited. Do you see the blue arrow here, angelos? Okay. Do you see the green arrow for Satan? Do you see the purple arrow for torment? This angel of Satan is tormenting him. This is demonic possession. Okay. And Jesus says, no, I'm not. And he said, after praying 3 times, he goes on in this passage to say, I prayed 3 times, and Jesus said to me, and your weakness is my strength. And ladies and gentlemen, the same person who says he's under a torment of angel of Satan, and his Jesus won't release him from a torment of an angel of Satan, is telling us that's by revelation. Paul has learned that Jesus does not have human flesh, though right over there in Galatians 1:11-12. Just line these up. Who could Jesus be who would not release someone from a torment and an angel of Satan? Jesus, the true Jesus, would have surely released Paul from a torment of an angel of Satan. And you would never leave them that way. But his revelation is to teach in Galatians 1:11-12 the exact words of John that match the Antichrist. If someone tells you that Jesus did not come in human flesh, sarx, S-A-R-X, it's all the word you have to have, that means you don't know Jesus. You don't know the true Jesus, Paul. And that's why this is I'm offering it up for you to have some critical examination. And now I want to tell you one more thing. Why have we never heard from Paul ever quoting this Jesus in these revelations that he's had? They're superior, allegedly, but he's going to tell you, he was told he's not allowed to tell you anything he's told there. So that's why all of his epistles are omitting any quotes of Jesus, except, ironically, the passage which I'm just reading you here, 2 Corinthians 12:7, where his Jesus says in the subsequent verse that, in your weakness is my strength. That's why I'm not going to release you from this torment of an angel of Satan. Now read 2 Corinthians 12, verses 3-6 with me. And now you have to know, this is Paul trying to be humble and trying not to say this is himself, but it's himself. And you know it when you read the whole context. So he's talking about himself. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body. See down here, bottom right, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 3-6. How that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter. So he's talking about his revelations. They're revelations that are unspeakable. He's not able to speak them. They can't come out of his mouth. He can't say, Yahweh told me this, or Jesus told me this. It's unspeakable. He can't say it. He's being prohibited from actually quoting Yahweh or Jesus. Now that's what he means. Not able to be spoken. It's not that he can't, how can I put it? It's not that he can't understand it. Then, which it is not lawful for man to utter. So he cannot utter the words. It's illicit for him to quote Yahweh or quote Jesus. He doesn't think, by the way, if you went to a place you thought was heaven and God is telling me you can't say my words and you're not able to even utter them. If you try, you can't do that. What prophet in every history of the Bible has ever been prohibited from actually quoting God Yahweh? But he's saying that's what happened. Of such a one I will glory. Yet of myself I will not glory, but in mine infirmities. For though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth. But now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he sees me to be, or he that hears of me. So as it progresses, the scholars all agree he's been talking about himself, but trying to say it in a humble way. Okay. So anyway, and then he gets into the whole passage about here. He's admitting it in verse 7. It's the next verse after verse 6 here. That begins up here at the top. verse 7, especially because of the extraordinary character of my revelations. He's now telling you that's me. I've been talking about me this whole time. All right, God bless everybody. I hope you see, if you're a Paulinist and you're a fan of his and you're listen to this point, I hope you will take time to study this. You put the video up on screen, freeze frame it, and then research and verify that all of this can be found at BibleGateway.com. Go to Mount C's Reverse Interlinear. There's so much truth you get out of when you see it at an interlinear level. You can see the words. You may not know Greek, but he's changed it from the Greek squiggly letters into English shaped letters, or our type of alphabet. All right. I hope and pray every one of you will turn to Christ and make him your sole pastor. He said that in John 10:16, and your sole teacher. He says that in Matthew 23:8-10, that you will then obey him. And that's what's in the Deuteronomy 18. And that's what's also in Acts 3:21-23. If you don't obey Jesus, you're going to be cut off from the people of God. So following Jesus is a priority over anybody else. Anybody who talks differently than Jesus, like Paul, you have to just run away from. And anyone who gives you the message of Antichrist, like Paul, whatever the reason, we don't know. Let's say we don't know, but we know the message is of the Antichrist. We run the other way. And probably the Jesus of Paul obviously shows his hand in the episode I showed here. This exact panel you're looking at is the truth that Paul should have seen, but he didn't see it. An angel of Satan is tormenting him, and his Jesus doesn't cast him out. What kind of Jesus is that? Is that our Jesus? I don't think so. All right. God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.